welcome to Everyday Moodlings. I'm your host, Jury Parks, and we are set for another Tuesday challenge. In this challenge, we are using spray ink. Okay, so spray ink is an incredible versatile product, and it comes obviously in many forms, many brands, many names. Some people call it spray ink, some are misting sprays, some are glimmer mist, some are spray stain. There are a lot of companies out there making misting spray. There's the only problem, one consistent to all of them is that they're messy. So we're going to be kind of messy today, making a multi-layered, multi-dimensional background using spray ink. So let's get started. What are we working with today? I'm working with Dylusions ink spray because I want an ink spray that is highly water soluble. So if you don't have Dylusions, you can use distressed ink spray. That works pretty well. The Color Wash by Ranger, that'll work too. So we're going to use that. We're going to use a technique that's going to highlight its water solubility. So I'll walk you through that. We're also going to use a couple of kinds of paint. The matte paint by Dylusions, which is really cool. Some white. I'm going to use a timestamp, a stencil. This swirl, this looks like a rubber stamp. It's actually not meant for stamping. It's a clay mold, but I'm going to use it for stamping. We're going to use that with the white paint on there. And then we have some accent pieces to layer on top. I'm also going to be using something called ultra high embossing powder. So if you've never used that before, I'll walk you through some tips for using that. Super fun. So let's get started. I am working with watercolor paper, cold press, which means it's rough or bumpy. And I've already stamped a image on there, just a text stamp, and I did use Stays On because I knew I was going to be adding water on the top, so I don't want it to react to the water. So the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and spray the whole thing with our Dylusions misting spray. So let me get set up to make sure I don't have too much of a really bright, bold, kind of almost cobalt. It's called London Blue. A very pretty color. So, but we kind of want to add in some extra layers, some dimension here. So we're going to start out by removing actually some of the color. I also want to add, you know, if you're using spray ink and you're going out later, you should really wear gloves because it stains everything. It washes, I mean, it rubs off pretty quickly, but it is going to stain everything. So this is a sticky template or stencil. This is made by Artsy. They're really pretty cool. And what I'm going to do is I want to just remove some of the color by using a clean baby wipe. You can also spray this. But we're just going to gently remove some of this color. And if I don't feel like I get enough, then I can go back and spray it and pick up more that way. And you want to make sure you're using a clean paper towel. Yeah, not quite getting as much as I want. Such a brilliant blue. Now as this dries, you'll see it gets even lighter. Now you want to make sure not to rub or be too aggressive with the paper. It is watercolor paper, so it's going to handle it a little bit better than cardstock, but if you get too aggressive, you're gonna have some problems with the paper itself. Okay, now we want to get this dry before we move on to the next step, and you can go ahead and use a heat gun on this. Okay, so I've dried it, I've taken back off that stencil, and so you can still see the dark. And actually, as we took off some of that ink, I found some purple undertones in there as well. Very cool look. By the time we're all done, you do get a little bleeding. It would be far worse had I just put a regular stencil down there, so the sticky ones are pretty cool for that. So now we're going to go ahead and add in some of our swirls using some white paint. I'm actually just going to brush it on here. And at this point, I'm not really looking for all over coverage. I just want certain spots to have a little white on them. And because it is so reactive to liquid, it's going to really kind of meld with that blue. And not stay true white. So it's a really, really pretty look that you can get from dilutions. Okay, so I got my white swirls stamped on there. And after I did it, I thought, that would look okay too if I had done the whole thing with it. So, pretty cool look. I love how it interacts with each other. So, now I gotta clean things up a little bit and let this dry before we start on the next step. Okay, so our background is all dry. Just want to mention again that you can, using spray ink, create some really dimensional backgrounds without adding any bulk. So that's one of the really nice characteristics of working with spray ink. I have lots of layers here and I haven't added any bulk to my ATC. So you might be wondering why I'm working on ATC if you haven't followed the blog or this is one of your first videos. I have a whole wall in my studio that is covered with ATC display boards, and these are the pieces I work on, and they go into the display board, and it's called my project inspiration wall. So that's why I work on ATC. Sometimes I do cards, sometimes I do tags, a little bit of scrapbook stuff, but most of the stuff that I work on is ATCs, or artist trading cards. And you can read more about the project inspiration wall on my blog, Everyday Moodlings. There'll be links, if you're on YouTube, there'll be links to the blog. So the next thing we're going to do is emboss this clock on here, because my saying is, time is our constant companion. It would be good if those were right side up. Use it wisely. So I want to put a clock on here, but I still kind of want it to be a kind of part of the background. So I'm not going to stamp it on something else and then cut it out and layer it on top. But I am going to use a ultra high embossing powder, so it'll leave a really nice glossy image of it. I'm making sure I have really good coverage of my embossing ink. It needs to be really thick to pick up these granules, because the granules are a lot bigger for the high emboss or ultra high embossing powder. Now, because these granules are a lot bigger, it is going to obscure the image a little bit more. It's not going, obscured is the wrong word. It is not going to be a real crisp image, but that's okay. That's what I was going for. Now for this one, this type of embossing powder, because it's so thick, it's really hard to emboss it from the top. You really need to get it started from the bottom. And as it starts, so you're going to hold your heat gun underneath it, and then as it starts to melt, you can move the heat gun to the top. Okay, so now it's all done. You can see how puffy and glossy that is. Very cool look to it, but Because the granules are bigger, you're not going to have as sharp, crisp image. And also, just a reminder, you want to start with the heat gun underneath because the granules are so big that you have an easier time blowing them off the page when they first start to melt. So let them start melting a little bit and then move the heat gun to the top to kind of finish it up. Now, originally I thought I would paint the whole clock purple, but I think I just want a little bit. I have these other clocks that I'm layering on top. And I think I want just a little bit behind. Because this is a really glossy, we'll see, I might, anyway, because this is a really glossy embossing powder, I should be able to go back and just wipe that paint back off if I want to. And again, remember the Dilutions is really highly reactive, so it's going to kind of meld a little bit with that blue behind it. And actually I can see the stenciled area is really popping through. It's pretty. Okay, I feel I need to go out farther. So I'm going to go ahead and get this clock taken care of, and then I'll be back to finish. And I've added my sentiment, and I outlined it with an Inktense water-soluble ink pencil. This is a little different than a watercolor pencil. It doesn't spread as much and it is permanent when it dries. Just a really fun tool to work with, or color medium to work with. And I use that to kind of outline my sentiment and give it just a little bit more oomph and a little bit of a shadow. You can also pull the colors into the actual sentiment itself. And I did also add some orange around, and I used my finger, and I did that specifically because I didn't want too much, and that kind of allowed me just to hit some of the ridges of the watercolor paper. And so this particular piece, I wanted to make sure that I kept it pretty flat. I was looking for something a little different. I can always do bumpy, bulky anytime, but sometimes it's nice to show that you can add in a lot of dimension without adding in a lot of bulk. So just, if you have any questions, please be sure to let me know. I do have a couple of shameless plugs for you. One, if you'd like to learn more about using spray ink and all the different things you can do with it, be sure to check out my spray ink color inspiration classes. There's one for spray ink, and then there's also one for watercolors that'll show you more about these Inktense pencils. Otherwise, stop by the blog for more inspiration and challenges. And I'm your host for Everyday Moodlings, Jury Parks, and we'll see you next week with a brand new challenge. So pull out those spray ink and get messy.